for when you start.
Okay, so this is on our Moodle page for next week. Do you see it, Maggie?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is just kind of like an outline of what your arguments will look like whenever you turn it from a bibliography to a research paper. Um, so a lot of this is pretty standard, cut and dry essay organization. But this is really if you think about it, this is really the first essay that you've written for me in this class. Besides, the bibliographies aren't really essays, and you've written all those précis for me. But a précis isn't really an essay either; it's just a summary. So even though you've done a lot of writing, you haven't really done a formal essay for me up until now. So these are kind of my expectations. So anytime, so you'll start with this. Of course, it's on your research topic that you did for your bibliography. All the research kind of leads up into you making an argument. And remember, your purpose is to write a persuasive argument about one of these like, controversial issues that we've been dealing with. I know a lot of people in the class have been doing contract grades. Um, a couple, like you're talking, Maggie, about doing the zero, getting a zero or a 50 instead of a zero. Some people are talking about like the grading of writing for Appalachian or African American or ESL students. So you guys are all over, the class as a whole is all over the place with your topics, but your goal when you write the paper is to persuade. Your goal isn't to inform the reader so much as it is to persuade. So like maybe if you investigate this, like the complexities of like whatever issue it is that you're dealing with, maybe you, for the persuasive part, maybe like you'll give some strategies on like how you should implement whatever it is into practice, for instance. So like let's say you did that getting a 50 instead of a zero, right? Um, you probably, to make that argument, you would probably have to speculate how would that work in practice. And then you might say, oh, well, will or won't because, and then you'll have like reasons. So anytime you write a paper like this in the introduction, you always need an attention grabber. You don't want to start out being like, uh, for decades, people have written about how you grade papers, right? That type of like general blanket statement is a boring way to start a paper. Um, Usually with intention grabbers, you want an interesting fact, statistic, quote, etc. Something like that to get the reader engaged. I always like, whenever I write something, I always like to start with a juicy quote to get the essay rolling. But then you want to give some context for what you're talking about. Of course, the most important part of this is writing a strong thesis statement. The thesis statement is the whole backbone on which the whole essay is built. So, usually a good thesis statement has three parts. This first part before the comma, while some argue blank, that's usually the counter argument. So that's the opposite of what you're going to argue. And then it is contended blank, like that's your claim, right? This is what you're setting out to prove in your paper. And everything after the because are your premises or your reasons for why you're going to make that argument. So, like, let's say, for instance, I would say, while some argue that contract grading will lead to greater student success, I argue that contract grading would fail at its ideal goals because then, like, maybe my first reason would be it would create a lower common denominator for success in students and for success in writing, rather. Maybe a second point would be it would lead to greater student anxiety about grades. Maybe my third point would be I'm trying to think. It would lead to even greater confusion about the difference between an A and a B. So I just kind of made that thesis statement up off the top of my head on the topic of contract grading. But you kind of see how this works. You know what the other side is. You know what you're arguing, and then you know why you're arguing it. So a good thesis statement has all of those parts built in. A counter argument, what you're arguing, and then how you're going to get there. It kind of like creates a nice roadmap for the reader on where the paper is going to go. And lots of times people will stop writing thesis statements right here, and they don't put everything after that because in there. Oftentimes when people do that, it causes disorganization to happen. So all those parts should be there for a good thesis, for a good argumentative thesis statement. And it doesn't have to be one long chunky sentence either. You can break it up into two or three sentences to get all your points, to get everything you need in there. I happen to write it like it's one long chunky sentence, but you can break it up into several sentences to get it exactly where you need it. So the thesis, the bedrock on which the whole essay rests, right? This is review of probably your basic English classes, but trust me when I say oftentimes people need the review. The second part of your essay before you get into your argument, it's called the lit review section. So the lit review section is where you add in the conversation about like what people were saying about your topic. So let's say I'm doing the contract grading, right? I might spend a paragraph talking about why people think contract grading is a good idea. And I might, if I had like 2 or 3 sources from my annotated bibliography talking about why people think contract grading is a good idea, that would be a place where I could kind of like quote their articles, quote their ideas. I can just kind of show the purpose of this part is to show the reader that you're educated on your topic and all the different arguments about it. So maybe I would spend a paragraph talking about here's all the reasons why in a scholarship why people think contract grading is a good idea. Okay, here's a couple of reasons why people think it wouldn't be a good idea. And in this part, I would cite a lot of my research that I've done in the bibliography. So this is a place to kind of flex your muscles, show the reader that you're educated on your topic. But you can also a part of this is analyze the scholarship you've read, show how you offer a unique perspective to it. So like maybe it's not a completely brand new perspective, right? Like let's say I'm arguing contract grading won't work, right? That's not a brand new idea, but maybe just think and reflect, like, okay, maybe I'm reaching this argument a different way than other people have, or maybe somebody hasn't made this point that I'm getting ready to make. So you kind of want to show how your work is at least slightly unique compared to other people who have written about this topic as well. So this is kind of where you flex your muscles. You show that you're well read and you know your topic quite well. And after finding 7 sources in your annotated bibliographies, you guys should all be at that point, unless there's a big gaping hole in your research. Like, let's say something like your research as to one-sided, for instance. That problem will show up here in this part. Of course, that's why it's important for me to get you feedback on it this weekend so that you'll know if you've done anything wrong with your research. So, yeah, this is, I say 1 to 2 paragraphs. One's probably too small. I'll say here at least 2 paragraphs. At least. You can maybe go 3 if you wanted. If you don't. The general rule of thumb for paragraphing is if you ever feel like you're going on too long, you probably are. Okay. I like to cut my paragraph. Anytime I write something, I like to cut my paragraphs off at about half a page. Usually if you go over half a page, you're going to lose the reader's attention. We live in a world where attention spans are small, right? Lots of people, lots of older generations like to say that millennials and Gen Z like watch TikToks, right, instead of YouTube videos, because we have small attention spans. You got to be aware of that. Everybody's got at least a somewhat small attention span, so you don't want to drag on and write paragraphs that go on too long. So, but after this part, this is where the main part of your argument is going to be written, and this will go longer than 1 or 2 paragraphs. This is the meat of your paper. This of your 7 pages or so. This will be where at least 50% of it is written, and that's when you present your argument. So whatever my first reason was up here after the thesis, I will start with that reason in my argument. So my thesis about contract grading, it will create a lower common denominator for success in writing. So I would start that part by just repeating that point. I would just almost like repeat that sentence verbatim. So that's a topic sentence. Think about it like you're drawing a little arrow, right? You draw an arrow from here back to here. This is your first point. Then you give evidence. So if I'm arguing that contract grading creates a lower common denominator for success in student writing, I need to prove that. So like maybe I would go and find some quotes from my article, or some examples from your article that you looked up in your annotated bibliography. I would bring that in as evidence to support that claim. And then you don't ever want to end a section just on a quote. Lots of times people make the mistake of you have a nice juicy quote there, but then you expect the reader to make an inference from the quote. You can't ever assume that the reader will make the inference of whatever you're trying to make them infer, right? So you need to drive home the point of what you're trying to say whenever you bring in evidence or quotes. So, like let's say I'm making this, it would create a lower common denominator for success in student writing. Okay, then I would quote Peter Elbow, right? His argument about the B. I would say, well, maybe then my interpretation would be it's actually not too hard to get a B in Peter Elbow's class, right? It creates a lower common denominator for success. You just kind of have to do the bare minimum, reach assignment standard to meet the standards to fulfill the contract, and that doesn't really constitute what a B normally would. Maybe that would look like what a C would. So, in the interpretation part, then I would kind of drive that point home. Hey, after looking at this evidence, it's pretty clear that this wouldn't work. So you kind of gotta be assertive and drive home the point of whatever it is that you're talking about. Then I would do that again. So my second point from the thesis, it would create greater student anxiety about grades. Okay, let's say I did that for my second point. I need to bring in evidence. Here's all these students who really wanted an A. So this contract grade thing drove them crazy because an A work wasn't clearly defined by the contract. So I can be like, this is going to cause a lot of mayhem and confusion for students. That might be my point. My third point, it would lead to even greater confusion about the difference between an A and a B. Okay, if a B is meeting the minimum standards almost in a grade contract, what's an A look like then? It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, Maggie, with getting a 50 instead of a 0. If you barely do something that would ordinarily constitute a 50, would that raise that up to like a 60? Right? That's the same kind of argument with contract grading. If getting a B is doing the bare minimum almost, what's an A look like then? So that I would maybe make the case, okay, that will create even greater confusion. So this is the meat of the paper. Again, this is where you will present the most stuff, and this will constitute probably about 3 or 4 pages of your paper. And don't think about these little sections like it's a section, not a paragraph. So again, if you ever feel like your parts are dragging on too long, it probably is. So like you can have 2 paragraphs, for instance, about your first premise. You could have 2 paragraphs about your second. You can have 2 paragraphs about your third. Or you can just have 1 paragraph about each one if you do a good job with it and don't drag it on. So the number of paragraphs is almost up to you as far as how you want to do it. A short paragraph's usually 3 or 4 sentences. You don't want to write a paragraph that short. But you kind of want to strike a nice balance between too little, and too much. And then, close to the end, this is the counter argument section. So this is actually, the way that I'm teaching this paper is actually a style of argument called classical argument. And it goes back to the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks used this style of argumentation when they were writing. And in the classic argument structure, you actually don't present anything about the counter argument, except maybe in like the lit review section. You don't present anything about the counter argument until close to the end. So at this point, you spent almost your whole paper trying to convince, and with my thesis here, I've tried to convince the reader the whole time that contract grading won't work. So I've already maybe kind of, if I'm doing a good job making that argument, I already kind of got the reader tilting. Think about it like a scale, right? It's already slightly tilting my way. Well, the counter argument then, this is where you kind of deliver the final knockout punch to that opposing argument to make the scale lean one way or the other. So in this section, I would have to, this would be a good place to cite some of my sources. And be like, okay, here's some people who argue why contract grading would work. Maybe I would like quote their articles and stuff. But then I would need to do something with that. If you just kind of leave it hanging there, like this is what the other side believes, and then you just kind of leave it hanging there, um, it'll damage your argument. You have to do something to it. You have to deliver the final punch. And so here's why people think it's a good idea. Here's why they're wrong. Right. So you kind of got to be really assertive there. Here, based on, maybe you can kind of go back to previous parts of your paper, like based on this survey somebody did, it clearly shows it won't work, for instance. Or you can also choose to be a little more diplomatic. Like you don't have to say the other side's completely full of baloney, right? You can be like, okay, they do have a few good points, but I still think the argument is more convincing that it wouldn't work. Here's why. So you can kind of be diplomatic about it too. They got some good ideas. Maybe you might say something like it's a good idea in theory, but probably wouldn't work too well in practice, right? So you could kind of make a more of a diplomatic argument like that with your counterpoint. So whatever tone you choose to take, it's up to you. Um, you can choose to kind of show, okay, here's why they're wrong completely, or you can kind of choose a tone. Okay, they have a few good points, but my point is better. So you can kind of organize, you can kind of do that counter argument section any way that you want.
That's what I was thinking, because, like, this whole time I've just, like, also been thinking, like, still thinking about that topic. Like, I don't know. All I could think about is, like, wow, like, that would really help me. Because, I have, like one or two zeros that were, like, just total flukes. Like, I, like, didn't even realize I had it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, dang, that 50 would really help. But then I'm like, it's just at the same time that affects the grading system for everything else. It would be like the grades that I have A's on would be like A plus plus pluses because they would just push up the entire thing.
Well, think about it like if, let's say, like you have a research paper and it's worth 30% of your grade, if you get a 50, you get 15% already, right? So, but if I don't turn my research paper in at the end of the class, usually the best you could do is get a 70.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like I just keep thinking like it would really help good students who might just have made a mistake, but then at the same time, it like wouldn't be fair because like that would mean a student could just turn in like mediocre work and they would get a good grade because it would have to boost up the entire grading system because then like theoretically if a zero sits at 50% and you turn in if you answer one question to an assignment where that would be it wouldn't be a 50 normally it would be like a 10%. You can't make it a 10% because they turn in more than a zero and a zero is 50%. Like it would have to be like 55% instead of like what it would normally be. So it just like students could just turn in mediocre work and get decent grades when there's students who try and turn and like try and do the assignment and try to get a good grade, and then it just makes it like anyone can just get good grades without even trying.
Yeah, like if you actually try but you still do mediocre work, right? That's not gonna
Yeah.
that's not gonna be fair to those people who actually did the work. Like if their
Yeah.
grades aren't too much different than somebody who didn't do the work at all, right? That's a problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, like let's say you were writing this part of your paper, Maggie. You can like whichever side you're arguing there, like that's a good time to bring it up, and then that's a good time to either say, okay, here's why they're wrong, or maybe they got some good points. Like it's a good idea in theory, but maybe not in practice.
Yeah. Because I just can't stop thinking about, like, wow, that 1-0, that was a total accident. Like, it's even like a weighted mindset. Like, it doesn't hurt my grade really in the long run because I have good grades on all my other assignments because I turn stuff in. But I'm like, dang, that 1-0, that was a total fluke. If it was 50%, it would help my grade. Even though my grade is fine, it would just still make it better. But then it just, in the long run, overall, from a total, complete everyone's, it just wouldn't.
It sounds like you've got your topic narrowed down.
Yeah, I just can't stop thinking about it now. I'm like, dang, this topic is crazy.
And then when you conclude, you just do two things pretty much. You sum up your argument again, and then you show why your argument matters and why it's important. So this isn't just an exercise, right? You kind of want to show, okay, this is this is a topic related to education, the teaching of writing, the teaching of grammar. Um, Here's why this matters for future students. So you kind of want to do kind of like a nice, larger significance style conclusion. And then I should put this on here too. Works cited page. You'll have a work site. Also, all the articles you used in your paper, um, you want to make sure that you cite them here in your works cited page in MLA style. So the same way that you cite them when you do the bibliography, you'll also cite them here on its own page. But you don't have to put the paragraph annotation after it. Just the citation.
For the it being in alphabetical order, is this off of like the name of
Right.
the like article, or is it like the author or the website's name?
Yeah. Usually, if you have an author, it'll start with the author, like whichever, like A to Z, right? Whichever. Like
Hmm.
if you have an author named Anderson, right, that's your first.
Okay,
Like
so from the
Paul, right?
got
So
it.
they would probably go first.
Okay, I'm glad I asked because I probably would have done it with like the name of the article and not the author.
Yeah. Well, there's one exception to that. If an author name isn't clear,
Yeah, like a corporate.
yeah, maybe you got it from a website or something, you would then start with the title.
Okay,
But
so
start with author first. But if there's no author, you start with the title and how you alphabetize.
okay, so if it's an article that doesn't have a specific author, but it was like written by an organization, do I put that organization or do I still refer to the name of the article first?
Still the name of the article first.
Okay, so not the organization name,
Right.
even if it states that it was written by that organization.
Now, because if you cite from a website, um, you actually state the organization's name in the
Yeah.
later part of the citation, so you don't
Yeah.
have to put it first.
I just know, at least in Word, if you cite through Word, under author, there's an option that says corporate author or something along those lines. And it's for like, if it wasn't, let me actually just check it. And it's for like, if it was written by like the organization and not a specific person. So I wasn't sure if like that would.
I think that's a very specific type of citation. Like,
Okay.
like let's say you were quoting like the mission statement on I don't know why Enron.com, right? You were quoting like that corporate's mission statement. That one you could probably then cite it something like what you're saying.
Okay.
But an ordinary website, um, you wouldn't cite that way.
Okay.
Here, I'll show you real quick. Um, this is the citation key that I have up on Moodle. There it is. Okay. If you're citing from like a normal website, like let's say I didn't know that William Eggleston wrote that article, right? I would start with the title, What Frankenstein's Monster Really Looks Like. That was on NewYorkTimes.com, published on Halloween 2018, and then the link. So, author, title, name of the website, date, and then link. And if you don't have a date, like let's say like you're doing one of those and a date isn't clear, you would put in period D period, meaning no date. But this, for when you do your annotated bibliography, Maggie, this key is up on Moodle, and pretty much everything you need to know to cite is on here. So follow my key. I would say follow my key before you, instead of like making Microsoft Word do your citations for you. Usually Microsoft Word will mess you up.
Okay.
Yeah, I like
I
to do.
usually just
I,
use
I,
this.
yeah, I always do mine by hand, just because Microsoft Word or EasyBib or something like that will usually mess you up.
They don't really teach it like that anymore in high school. At least where I went to high school, we were taught to use Microsoft Word citation. Yeah. Like when you click like references on Word, it has like it's like insert citation, and that's how we were taught
Taught to
to.
do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I was younger, they taught it differently, but I specifically remember my senior year in high school, that's how they taught it. And like I've done it like that ever since. Like
Yeah, that type of thing is what made me lose my hair. Right, high school teachers telling people these bad habits, and
yeah,
then they get to me, and then they don't know better because that's how they were previously taught.
that's how I did it all last year too. For any for all my English classes last year, any essay I had to write, that's how I would cite my sources was I would use the words reference.
Did you mess any of them up that you remember?
Um Not to my knowledge. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't believe I was deducted any for it. And no one ever told me anything different in any like grading feedback or anything. I was never told not to do it that way or anything like that.
Yeah, usually the way it'll mess you up is it'll put too much stuff in there that you don't need, honestly. So like
Hmm.
that's usually Like it'll put like for like a journal article, it'll like put the URL to the journal article. You don't need that.
Yeah, and I always like, cause you like fill it in, like you like fill in whatever information that you choose or you found, and I always put in the URL. I always put it in because I thought that I needed to. Like I thought that teachers and professors like needed that information.
Yeah, if it's a normal website, you put a URL, but not like a journal article that you find
Hmm.
on the library.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So, but my guidelines for this, I'm looking for roughly 7 pages. If you go over that, that's fine. Try not to go too far under. Like if it's like 6.5 or something, that's fine. But if you're like 5.5 or something, you're probably not writing as much as you need to. So roughly about 7 pages is what I'm looking for. And I'm asking for these a little early, um, just because there's only so much I can humanly do in 2 days during that weekend. So I would actually like to get to this class first when I grade stuff. So I'm going to ask for it next Wednesday, the 24th by noon. Okay. And I would like to spend that afternoon in my office grading them. So, because I have a bunch of other stuff rolling in Friday, and I'd like to be done with this and have your final grades back to you before I get to that other stuff I have to do. So, you guys, unfortunately, are first on my priority list for grading. So, but I figured next Wednesday, that's 8 days. That's enough time to conjure this up. You've already done the hard work because you've done your research. So if by the time you do your research, the hard work's over. So yeah, the noonish on next Wednesday. That'll be when you submit this final paper. Maggie, you're the only one here for this. You have any questions as far as the structure and how you organize and all this stuff?
Nope. I think I'm good.
Yeah, like I said, none of this information is new, but you'd be surprised that how I do need to review it. Just because if I don't, people will not do the basic stuff. So,
Yeah. I mean, I definitely wouldn't have cited my source that way. That's for sure.
I should also mention, um, just to remind, the way that you cite inside the text. Um, so let's say I said something like, let's say I mentioned the author's name in the sentence. Peter Elbow says this about contract grading. Quote. And then I would put the page number in the parentheses, and then period goes after the parentheses. So if you state the author's name in the sentence, you actually don't have to put the author's name in the parentheses. But let's say I said, um, let's say I'm kind of vague in the sentence about the who wrote the article. I would then put the author's name in the parentheses. So if it's clear from the context of the sentence who you're talking about, you don't have to put the author's name in the parentheses. But if it's unclear, that's when you put the author's name in the parentheses whenever you cite something. And you don't have to put P period 42. Like I say, that's on page 42. You don't have to put P period 42. Just put 42.
Um, What if it's like just a quote from an article that like doesn't have pages?
Mm-hmm.
Then do you just put the author's name?
That's a good question. If you can count how many paragraphs it is, usually you just kind of put the paragraph number. So let's say then I would put like I found that quote on paragraph 4. And you put PARA period 4. See, in that case, if it doesn't have a page number, just count the paragraphs until you get to the number of which one.
Okay. So, okay, got it.
And anytime the rule is, anytime you change sources, cite. So, like, let's say you start citing my article, and then you cite Maggie's article, and then you cite my article again. And every one of those times you would need to cite because you're changing. Let's say you cite my article first, then you cite Maggie's article 3 times in a row, then you go back and cite mine again. Well, that second and third time that you cite Maggie's article, you wouldn't have to keep putting her name because it's understood that you're still quoting from the same person. But lots of times people overkill it, putting the name in over and over and over if you quote multiple times in a row when you don't have to.
If you quote multiple times in a row, do you still put the page
Yeah, so that,
and just not the name?
right.
Okay.
And the page number actually you might be using that same source, but the page, it might be a quote on a different page. So you would still put the page number, but you just wouldn't keep putting the author name over and over.
Got it.
So yeah, that's how you do these in MLE. APA is a little different. And a lot of you guys are probably more used to that. Um, but I think MLE is way simpler. And that's the discipline of English studies. So I know you guys, even though you're education majors, you're used to your APA. We do things in MLE around the English department. So
It's kind of funny that teacher my senior year who had us cite like that, she was the meanest woman and was all like, would have us write these absurdly long essays or just what she was very frustratingly pickable, like precise, and like she was just very rude. And she was like, well, I'm preparing you for college, this, that, and the other. Your professors are gonna be like this. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm about to email her and be like, girl, you taught us wrong. Like, you were all mean, didn't even teach us the right thing.
yeah, you taught us how to cite wrong. So thanks for that.
I'm in my second year of college, and now I have to relearn the entire way that I've been citing sources the past however long.
Well, that just goes to show you that we're in need of some good high school teachers that do things the right way. So,
Boy, don't tell her that. She thinks she's the best in the world.
you know, yeah, so yeah, that's how a lot of them are, I suppose.
Yeah.
Especially the old ones that have been doing it for
Yep,
like 20 years. They think they're
that's
all
her
better.
right there.
All right, Maggie. So I guess for you, the next step is to start doing your research. So there's actually a pretty good. You might have to play around with your search terms.
Hmm.
But you'll find a lot of stuff just because that's such a hot button issue. And if you for that topic, if you find more stuff in the on Google than you find in the databases, that's fine. Just because there's
Mhm.
so much, it's such a recent topic that there might not be a lot of stuff in the databases about it.
Mhm.
So, but you still want to try to get a balance of databases and websites. But if the balance slightly tilts towards websites for that topic, that's fine.
Um, what would you suggest be like the best wording for finding like what exactly is it called? Like how should I
What would your
research?
search terms be?
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.